Recording.
All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Association of Jewish Libraries, AJL Presents, Member Authors. Welcome. We're really excited to have you here, and we hope to continue this series a few times a year. I'm going to start by going through, we have 9 authors with us today. I'm going to start by reading their bios in advance so that we'll be able to move through their talks with the most amount of time possible. So here are the speakers that we have with us today. Sheila Jelen is the Zandker Professor in Jewish Literature, Culture, and History at the University of Kentucky. She is currently completing a book on Israeli Salvage Poetics, which explores the way that Eastern Europe is presented in Israeli literature from the 1940s through the turn of the 21st century. She is the author of Intimations of Difference, Devara Baron in the Modern Hebrew Renaissance, as well as the co-editor of Reconstructing the Old Country, American Jewry in the Post-Holocaust Decades. Jelen is now working on a project titled Testimonial Montage, which considers families of Holocaust testimonies given by ghetto fighters who made Aliyah after the Holocaust. I'm going to request that anybody who's unmuted to please mute themselves. Professor Pamela Nadel holds the Patrick Clendenin. Sorry, just needed a moment. Sorry. Professor Pamela Nadel holds the Patrick Clendenin Chair in Women's and Gender History at American University, where she directs the Jewish Studies program and receives the university's highest award, Scholar Teacher of the Year. Dr. Nadel is also a past president of AJL's affiliate, the Association for Jewish Libraries. Her recent book, America's Jewish Women, A History from Colonial Times to Today, is out from W.W. Norton in 2019 and won the National Jewish Book Award for the Everett Family Foundation Jewish Book of the Year. The paperback edition was published in May 2020, and as we're in Women's History Month, this is a particularly appropriate book that we'll be hearing about. Yelena Luckert is Director of Research, Teaching, and Learning at the University of Maryland Libraries, where she provides leadership and policy creation, development, implementation, strategic planning, and assessment for the library's liaison program and the research and teaching operations. In addition, Ms. Luckert is the subject specialist librarian for Jewish and Slavic studies. During her tenure at the University Libraries, Ms. Luckert was instrumental in building successful Judaica and Slavica collections and developed numerous programs and events in her subject areas. Luckert's research interests include assessment of academic library services, liaison librarianship, international librarianship, Russian and Jewish area studies. She authored articles, books, and book chapters and presented at numerous conferences. Amy Byers Shaneman, also known as BRCA Responder, is an advocate, author, and producer providing support and education surrounding BRCA and other hereditary cancer syndromes. She is the executive producer of the award-winning documentary, Pink and Blue, Colors of Hereditary Cancer. Her memoir, Resurrection Lily, was the December 2020 book club selection of the National Library of Medicine. Mira Suharov is Professor of Political Science and University Chair of Teaching Innovation at Carleton University in Ottawa, Canada. She's the author or editor of 5 books, and her many op-eds have appeared widely in the Jewish press. She is the founding co-chair of the Jewish Politics Division at the Association of Jewish Studies and is co-editor of AJS Perspectives. Eliana Adler teaches and studies East European Jewish history at Penn State University. She has held fellowships at Yad Vashem and the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum and published other books and articles in related areas. Warren Hoffman is the executive director of the Association for Jewish Studies and the author of The Great White Way, Race and the Broadway Musical and the Passing Game, Queering Jewish American Culture. Yirmiyahu Arun Tao is a poet, writer, and Yiddish translator. He is the author of 2 books of fiction, Beloved Comrades, a novel in stories from 2020, and Prodigal Children in the House of God, Stories from 2018, as well as 6 volumes of poetry, including A Mouse Among Tottering Skyscrapers, Selected Yiddish Poems in 2017, and the translator most recently of May God Avenge Their Blood, a Holocaust memoir triptych by Rachmil Bricks in 2020. Zev Bar Eitan was born in Los Angeles, California, and has a degree in English literature as well as rabbinic ordination. He has worked as a Bible teacher taught in adult education at Gush Etzion since 1990. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our first speaker, Sheila Yellen, who will be speaking I just need to find her in our, there you are, who's going to be speaking about her book, Salvage Poetics, Post-Holocaust American Jewish Folk Ethnographies. Go for it, Sheila. Thank you. Are you muted?
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I just was saying my thank yous. I'm just so excited to be here. Thank you very much for organizing this. I'm happy to see some very close colleagues and friends on this call and to make some new friends and learn about everyone's work. So when I was a child, I thought that Tevye the milkman was a great uncle of mine. My father resembled him and loved to throw up his arms and stick out his belly and sing If I Were a Rich Man. The funny thing is that my father, a native speaker of Yiddish, actually came from Eastern Europe. So why did he identify so completely with Tevye, an American icon of East European Jewry? Because Americans knew Tevye, and my father wanted Americans to know him as well. How do American Jews, the vast majority of whom originated in Eastern Europe, imagine the world they came from? With what do they associate that world? Certainly with Fiddler on the Roof, but with what else? On the screen, you can see, you will see in a minute. Oh,
I can see it. Oh, sorry.
On the screen, you can see 3 related images that tell some of the story I try to tell in Salvage Poetics. First, there's an image taken in Brooklyn by Cornell Kappa in 1955 of boys learning Torah with their Rebbe. Then there's an image of Jerome Robbins taken in 1955 by Henri Cartier-Bresson with the Kappa Cheder image in the background. Finally, there is the original publicity poster for the Hollywood adaptation of Jerome Robbins' 1964 Broadway play, Fiddler on the Roof. Fiddler on the Roof is a good example of aspects of Salvage Poetics when we consider the genesis of the 1964 Broadway play from a text in the Yiddish Tevye stories of Shalom Aleichem to a musical spectacle in English. Robbins' research on background for the play began with his, quote, search for a photograph that could define the world he felt that he needed to capture, the world that he felt that he needed to capture, a world of infinite poverty and obsessive study as he saw it. Cornell Kappa's 1955 Hebrew lesson features a man in traditional Hasidic dress hovering over a table full of little boys, pointing to the text that lay before them. This photograph became Jerome Robbins' muse. He hung Hebrew lesson on the wall in his office, and it accompanied him throughout the journey that was to be the fiddler phenomenon. What are salvage poetics? Salvage poetics are created when texts or images are mediated, translated, explicated, personalized, and or valorized in an effort to create an accessible description of a lost culture. Salvage poetics represent the marriage of aesthetic and ethnographic impulses. Salvage poetics are the result of a streamlining of popular desire on the part of an audience and specialized linguistic and cultural knowledge on the part of authors. Salvage Poetics, Post-Holocaust American Jewish folk ethnographies explores the literary sources and visual images American Jews in the post-Holocaust period have used to formulate an understanding of pre-Holocaust East European Jewish life. Salvage Poetics traces an arc from the literary to the visual in popular American Jewish apprehensions of the Jewish world destroyed in Eastern Europe. The book begins with an exploration of the popular ethnographies Life is with People and the World of Shalom Aleichem, and moves on to an analysis of anthologies produced by Irving Howe and Eliezer Greenberg, Lucy Davidovich, Lucianda Brzezinski, and Barbara Kirschenblatt-Gimblett. Abraham Joshua Heschel's eulogy to East European Jewry, The Earth is the Lord's, is presented as a unique hybrid of literary and visual materials, leading to a discussion of the pre-Holocaust photographic oeuvre of Roman Vishniak and Alter Katzizne, and the paintings of Ben Shahn and Meir Kirschenblatt. More generally, the focus of the book is Yiddish literature in English translation, iconic photographs of East European Jews popularized in America after the war, and popular ethnographies developed in the immediate post-Holocaust years. How do American Jews know what they think they know about pre-Holocaust East European Jewish life? Salvage Poetics attempts to answer that question. And that's it.
Thank you, Sheila. That was fantastic. And once again, I'm going to put in the chat a link to purchase Salvage Poetics. Next, we're going to turn to Pam Nadel for her work on American Jewish women.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And it's just great to be here with everyone. I hope you can see the slide. Did that come up?
Yeah.
Great. So I have 5 minutes in Women's History Month to share with you. And I want to introduce the 2 women in my prologue who take us into this story. The first is Grace Nathan. And you likely have never heard of her, but now you can see her in this amazing portrait. She lived her life as a daughter, a sister, a wife, a mother, a grandmother, and a widow. But if you look at her dates, and if you happen to know your American history, you will see that she lived through the Revolutionary War, the Declaration of Independence, and the Constitution. But in her letters in the archive and her unpublished poetry, she does not write about the grand events of her era, but rather about a niece who has been spitting up blood for weeks. But, she continues, the doctors are not terribly concerned. They think her corsets are too tight. The second woman, Emma Lazarus, I expect that you are familiar with her, the famed poet whose words have welcomed the huddled masses yearning to breathe free in the base of the Statue of Liberty for more than a century. She never married, she never bore a child. What you may not know is that she was Grace Nathan's great-granddaughter. 2 American Jewish women, born a century apart, living lives fixed within the social rules set for their class and gender, take us into this story. Startlingly, they took America's freedoms to challenge Judaism. In her poem In Exile, Emma Lazarus imagined her ancestors trudging out of Spain to come to this land of freedom, to love the law that Moses brought, and to think the thoughts Spinoza taught. Celebrating the Dutch Jewish philosopher Benedict de Spinoza, who had been excommunicated from Amsterdam's Jewish community, made Emma Lazarus a Jewish maverick. Strikingly, so was her great-grandmother, who in her ethical will told her son that at her death he should only keep his beard for 7 days, boldly circumventing the Jewish custom whereby an observant son would not shave for a minimum of 30 days following the death of a parent. She too left a legacy of change in her Jewish world. Together, Grace Nathan and Emma Lazarus lead us into the story of America's Jewish women, those whose names you know and those unknown to you, who were sisters and daughters, wives and mothers, teachers and workers, activists and mavericks across the centuries. Thank you.
Thank you, and excellent timing. I'm going to once again share the link to buy this book, which again is perfectly appropriate for this month. And we will move to Yelena Lucker with a library-themed book.
Hi, I would like to start by thanking Michelle and AGL for giving me this opportunity, and I'm very excited to be here today. ACRL approached and convinced me to do a book on international librarianship in 2018. I was very concerned because I was not sure if my English was good enough to do it. Thus, choosing a co-editor correctly became everything to me. Lindsay and I ended up strongly complementing each other. We both grew from the process, and for once, I became a really good editor, even in English. We sent out the call for participation to any reflector we could think of, including AGL. Our rejection rate was around 25%, and it took about a year and a half to put together a volume consisting of 33 chapters and an introduction. Next one, please. It was important for us to include an introduction that frames the entire volume. The introduction is a historical reflection on American libraries and how truly international in nature they have been from the very beginning. Today, we see a globalization of libraries, both traditional and emerging in our collections, library employees for whom English is the second language, reference and instructional services for diverse student and faculty body, digitization and preservation efforts of primary sources in non-Western languages, in supporting international programs such as study abroad, and more recently, global efforts at building satellite libraries abroad. Here are some fun facts from the introduction. The 2020 Open Doors report details that not much have changed since the stats we reported in this volume, including under Corona. It is easy to see that globalization impacts our campuses, alters institutional priorities, and thus influences libraries' collection and operations, propelling us to change what we do and how do we do things. The chapters in this book detail how our work has changed and became globalized. They demonstrate new ways to address language and cultural differences, handling collection in non-Western alphabets, challenges with international purchases and processing of materials, international literacy needs of students world apart, and professional ties with libraries across the globe. It explores the use of campus library partnerships to create specially designed programs and learning opportunities for international students, providing support to American students studying abroad, creating online teaching tools, and establishing American-style libraries at satellite campuses in countries where access to information is highly restricted. There are two chapters in this book that detail work specifically with Judaica collections at two major research universities. They're examples of intertwining between, next slide please, I'm so sorry, between collections, digitization, and user services, and provide interesting perspectives on how things are merging together. Yeah, we're here now. Chapter 18 offers an overview of selected programs and projects that articulate the intersections of three collections: the Latin American Caribbean collections, the Isa and Rea Price Library of Judaica, and the Panama Canal Museum collections, essential to digital library projects and innovative instructions at the University of Florida. Chapter 19 provides another example of an innovative instructional program developed for students at the Michigan State University based on the Hebrew popular collection, specifically Hebrew graphic novels housed in the special collections of the university. Next slide, please. This article is of personal importance to me. The University of Maryland Libraries have been developing a partnership between UMD and several institutions in Russia, which began with a study abroad course titled International Opportunities in International Studies, Libraries and Cultural Heritage Institutions of St. Petersburg, Russia, in which I was a primary developer and instructor. Lindsay, the co-editor of this book, and the blonde woman second on the right, was a student in this class in 2014. This article consists of two parts, one detailing experiences of the instructor of the course, and two, experience from the student perspective. I believe this is a very unique way of dealing with this issue. And that is all. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm muted there. I was sharing, so I couldn't share the link in the chat as an ebook. Yelena's book is available as an ebook and a physical book.
It says I should use
I've just shared that link there. Okay, next up, we have Amy Byer Shaneman. Let me find you so that I can spotlight you. There you are. Okay.
Unmute myself. Okay. Can you hear me? Hi, thanks, Michelle. Gratitude for this program. I'm going to jump right in, and I'm going to read you an excerpt from a letter. Let me give you a little context. After receiving 2 medical opinions on his wife's condition, a man named Bo seeks a 3rd opinion on his wife's condition from a Dr. Fred Rankin. This excerpt is from Dr. Rankin's reply to Bo. The letter is dated July 1934. Dear Bo, your letter of July 20th is before me. I deeply regret that I'm unable to give you much comfort or hope after reading of your wife's condition. Obviously, the diagnosis of metastatic malignancy following a cancer of the breast removed 2 years ago cannot be disputed. I believe that you have had the most competent advice and that there is very little that I can add to what has already been told to you. Consequently, I believe that there would be no advantage in bringing your wife to me. Regretfully, I must concur in the opinion that her case is a hopeless one. Sincerely, Dr. Fred Rankin. Now, this is sad, very sad, but I don't read it to make you cry or to depress you, but to shed important light on hereditary cancer. You see, Bo was my grandfather, and the woman he is speaking about, his wife, was Lillian, my grandmother. Lillian was the grandmother I never knew in my book, Resurrection Lily. It's my book, Resurrection Lily. She died in 1934, 2 months after this letter was written. She was only 33 years old, and my dad was only 7 years old at the time. This letter and the initial letter from Bo are also included in my book. The title is to honor Lillian, but it's also to share how hereditary cancer comes up or is resurrected in the next generation. Because fast forward to 2008, and my sister was diagnosed with 2 separate primary cancers, ovarian cancer and uterine cancer. And while my sister received excellent care and her healthcare providers really did save her life, there was a really big component missing. My sister had huge flags for BRCA and hereditary cancer, but no providers urged her to undergo genetic counseling or genetic testing. And widespread genetic testing for BRCA was available 12 years prior. It had become available in 1996. It was only after she advocated for herself that she received genetic counseling and genetic testing. And she ended up testing positive for a BRCA1 gene mutation, one of the 3 founder mutations associated with people of Ashkenazi Jewish descent. How many of you are aware that men and women of Eastern or Central European descent, specifically Ashkenazi Jewish descent, have approximately a 1 in 43 chance of having a BRCA1 or BRCA2 gene mutation? That's a 10-fold higher risk than the general population. Well, what is BRCA? Everyone is born with BRCA1 and BRCA2 genes. It's when you are born with a mutation in one of these genes, which are tumor suppressing genes, that you have an increased risk of developing certain cancers. And although there are different ramifications for men, men can also carry and pass on a BRCA1 or 2 gene mutation to daughters and or sons. I inherited the BRCA1 gene mutation too. My breast cancer risk was as high as 85% in my lifetime, and my ovarian cancer risk as high as 50% in my lifetime. I was the first female in my family that was able to drastically reduce my cancer risk with prophylactic or preventative surgery. Finally, it's what didn't happen with my sister's healthcare providers and what everyone didn't know that compelled me to write Resurrection Lily. And it continues to fuel my advocacy efforts today as the BRCA responder. And it's medical information, so I felt a responsibility to include my physicians as well as qualified cancer genetics experts chiming in within my story. Remaining silent is not an option for me. It's imperative that the Jewish community know this information. This is life-saving information. Thanks.
Thank you, Amy. And I didn't get a chance to share, so I'll share it real quick, this picture of your grandmother, which I think says in 1,000 words what you've shared with us. So thank you very much. Okay, next up, we're going to have Mira Sukharov, who's going to talk about borders and belonging. I'm sorry. Let me change our spotlight. And there you go.
Thank you. Age 20. Whenever I arrive at the kibbutz, my senses brace for a tingling overload. The sweet microbes that rush my nose from the cowshed, the fields of red poppies that flood the surrounding desert wadi whenever winter gives way to spring. The softness of the pink kibbutz factory blankets we've been issued for the metal beds in our student apartment, and the dirt that lodges under my fingernails as I sort potatoes on a combine. I love kibbutz. I love everything about it. The safety, the microcosmic world. I love befriending Israelis and feeling like I am part of something that isn't quite mine. It reminds me of my Jewish summer camp on the shores of Lake Winnipeg, a little self-enclosed universe where everything is in Hebrew and everything is ours. Age 4. My eyes dart from my mom to my dad and back again before landing on the toys, books, and records that are spread out along the green carpet. The seams of the lid to Hi-Ho Cheerio are ripped and the little plastic cherries have spilled out of the box. My mom speaks first. Put the toys you want to keep at Mummy's place here. She points to a spot near the window. And the toys you want to take to Daddy's place there. My mom's instructions take a few seconds to land. I don't understand what it means to have a daddy's place and a mummy's place. Until now, this house with the green carpet, this house with my brown bedspread, with the little lines I like to run my hand over, the house with my Fisher-Price record player and my arts and crafts supplies, and the dresses that I prefer not to wear because I like my jeans and my long sleeve shirts with iron-on Sesame Street patches, except when I held my mom's hand while we wore matching outfits for a fashion show at the mall, because I liked having all eyes on me. This house has been a home for the three of us. Age 45. In so many ways, Israel has been my home and not my home. It's been an instigator of and a bystander to the tension that defines so many relationships here in North America. If we didn't have Israel, I suppose we'd have something else on which to place and measure our shifting, insecure identities. So tonight I'm living out the path I actually took. Tonight I walk through the dry riverbed near my home in Ottawa. The dry riverbed that is like my personal wadi, awaiting the water from the nearby canal, which will signal that winter has given way to spring. I stare at my eerily long shadow, the low light stretching my limbs until I look like an alien, while I listen to a podcast on my phone. It's a CBC journalist who is interviewing the Israeli author, David Grossman. As I listen, I'm already mentally on social media. I'm casting about for words to capture what I think of the interview. And then a familiar tension settles into my shoulders. No doubt there will be some virtue signaling on my part when I take to social media as I try to walk the line between being heard and being respected by acting like a detached and critical scholar while displaying what's at stake for me emotionally. And no doubt there will be some pushback from others, some friendly, some challenging, and some perhaps shaming. In my Facebook post that night, I lay out my critiques while also acknowledging the beautiful moments. I think about this place, this country, Israel, that is home and not home, that is idyllic and flawed, that continues to make me wonder where on this earth, in my Jewish community, in my scholarly communities, where I belong. This place, this country that tests my values while it seduces me. I close my post by writing, "It's Israel after all." Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. And again, the link to buy Mira's memoir is in the chat. We're actually doing very well on time, so thank you all for your great efficiency. I greatly appreciate it. All right, we're going to move on to Eliana Adler. And I found you and you're spotlighted. There you go.
Thank you. I'm so honored to be part of this panel today to tell you about my new book. The morbid fact that 90% of Polish Jews died during the Holocaust is well known. Less commonly understood is that of the remaining 10%, the surviving remnant of the largest Jewish community in Europe, 7 out of 10 survived in the unoccupied regions of the Soviet Union. Survival on the Margins, Polish Jewish refugees in the wartime Soviet Union, seeks to tell their story. It's a complex story involving vast geographic areas and surprising twists and turns. With the invasion and partition of Poland in September of 1939, Polish Jews in the territories taken by the Germans faced a decision. Should they stay in their homes and communities, or take the risk of becoming refugees in order to try their luck under the Soviets, who had taken the other half of their country? Several 100,000 Polish Jews took the leap and fled eastward. In the newly annexed Soviet territories, they faced the usual displacement and confusion of refugee life, and also the onslaught of Sovietization, as the new regime sought to implement all of its political, economic, and social policies overnight. The difficulties of this transition and of their unsettled condition helps to explain why, when given the choice of accepting Soviet citizenship or returning to their homes in the German-held territories in early 1940, most of these refugees signed up for repatriation. However, the trains that came, that they boarded in June of 1940 to take them home went east instead of west. By refusing to accept Soviet passports, the refugees had proven themselves to be unreliable and ungrateful in Stalin's eyes, and were to be deported to labor installations in the interior. They were told that they would never be released, and they faced a year of slave labor under punishing conditions. But then, with the German invasion of the USSR in the summer of 1941 and the consequent geopolitical realignments, the Polish citizens in the Gulag were suddenly amnestied. Exhausted and cold from their ordeals, most went south, hoping for better climatic and nutritional conditions in Central Asia. The 200,000 or so Polish Jewish refugees encountered landscapes and cultures well beyond their ken. They were also joined by as many as 16 million Soviet evacuees from the war zone. All of this led to severe overcrowding and lack of access to even the most basic resources. The Polish Jewish refugees spent the rest of the war trying to survive hunger and epidemic disease in Soviet Central Asia. As the Red Army gradually liberated their former homes, news of the destruction began to trickle in. However, the refugees would not comprehend the true scale of the genocide until, in 1946, they were finally allowed to return to Poland. There they saw the results of the Holocaust. They looked for surviving family members and information about those who were murdered. They also faced yet another set of decisions. Should they try to stay in Poland to rebuild Jewish life? Or should they become refugees once again? Some stayed. Most turned out joining the stream of other Polish Jewish survivors into the DP camps, and then to Israel, the United States, or any country that would accept them. In the DP camps and in their adopted countries, they took an active role in commemorative efforts for their individual and shared losses. Their own stories of surviving in the USSR gradually disappeared. And this book seems to tell those stories and has two main intended audiences. First of all, it's written for the family members of this group of Polish Jewish refugees. Many of them know their own family stories well, but they think that what happened to their family was something personal, something particular. They don't understand the larger context within which those stories fit. Others don't know their family stories at all. Their parents never spoke about them. So I wrote this book to help the family members and their progeny make sense of what they lived through. Additionally, this book is for all of us who study and teach about the Holocaust. We need to know about this alternative survival experience and to think seriously about how to integrate it into our research and teaching. Thank you.
Thank you, Eliana. I guess I'll use moderator's privilege to say that this is the story of my grandparents who refused the Russian citizenship and were sent to Siberia and then went south to Kazakhstan. So very much appreciating your talk. Move on to a much lighter story. Well, actually not so much lighter story, actually, with Warren Hoffman and the Great White Way. So here we go. Very different kind of story.
Yes. Thanks, Michelle. It's great to be here. So when I was 9 years old, my parents took me and my sister to see what was for me my first ever Broadway musical. It was the first touring company of 42nd Street. And I fell in love with that show right away. I fell in love with musicals right away, with how could you not? The singing, the dancing, the music, everything. There was something just so lighthearted and frothy and carefree about them. And over the next many years, I became a huge fan of musicals, seeing hundreds and hundreds, probably close to 1,000 at this point in my life, of musicals, not just in the US, but all over the world and in multiple languages. But in grad school, studying a variety of different things, I had an amazing opportunity to take both a seminar and then a one-on-one independent study with the amazing and renowned scholar and civil rights activist, Angela Davis, and getting to learn from her, not just about things around racial theory and critical race theory, but really about whiteness and whiteness studies. And learning with her really opened up my mind and eyes to the world around me. And all of a sudden, the musical took on very, very new dimensions. No longer was it just this frothy piece of pop culture, but I was really looking at it in new ways, and it had very profound things to say about the world around us. So my book, The Great White Way, Race in the Broadway Musical, which is now just came out in a revised second edition, updated, really looks at this topic. And it's interesting because for some people, even though it's about race, it is not just about the usual musical suspects, such as South Pacific or West Side Story. Well, actually, the West Side Story is in there, but South Pacific, The King and I, Flower Drum Song. But it's actually about a lot of other shows that people don't think about being about race. Shows maybe like Oklahoma, The Music Man, A Chorus Line, 42nd Street, and even and new shows in this new edition like The Book of Mormon and Hamilton. So the book is definitely for musical theater fans to read, and I guarantee you, if you like musicals, you will never look at them the same way again. But really quickly, since this is around from the AJL, I want to sort of say what is Jewish about this book. And there's quite a lot in this book that's Jewish, and not just the fact that many of the creators of these shows were Jewish, but that everything from, I look at how there were relations between, let's say, Jews and Native Americans in shows like Oklahoma and Annie Get Your Gun, to things like the Jewish background of the creators of Showboat. But very quickly, with Passover around the corner, I want to just read a very quick selection from the chapter on West Side Story, which many people don't know actually began as East Side Story, which is supposed to be about Jews and Catholics fighting it out in the streets of New York during the holiday of Passover and Easter. And multiple drafts were written for this show. And here's just a quick snippet to give you a sample of like what's in this book and what's at stake here. So scene one, a tenement is revealed and we are looking into one of the upper apartments. The Capulets. To music, a Seder is in progress. The Capulet family, Juliet, Tanta, other cousins are all there. They have come to the 4 questions. Tybalt, the only child, should ask these, but he is not at home. Loafing with that gang, his mother says irritably, and a cousin asks the questions. The Seder, sung in English, continues, and the background slowly is lighted. Outside, a cop chases Romeo. The Seder continues, and they have reached the last of the 10 plagues, the death of the firstborn, Tybalt, who was killed by Romeo. The scene even involves the search for the hidden matzah. That's a West Side Story that never happened. And so if you want to learn more about that and how it's all related to race and Jewish identity in the 1950s, that's a lot of what this book is about. So again, if you like Broadway musicals, check this out. I think you'll really see them in a brand new way. Thank you.
Thank you, Warren. And I should have mentioned at the beginning, but I'll say it again now. Not again, I'll say it now. If you have any questions as we go, feel free to drop them in the chat and we'll address them at the end, or you can chat them directly to me and I will raise them. Our settings right now, I think, don't allow you to unmute. So I need you to chat me to let me know if you're going to want to be unmuted during our chat. All right, we next turn to Yirmiyahu Arun Tao, who's going to talk about, he actually has 2 recent books that have come out. And I will spotlight him and we will hear his story. Go for it.
Okay, thanks Michelle, thanks Chaim and Kathy and Jackie and HAL and everyone. It's really great to hear all these wonderful talks. So I'm going to talk about 2 books, as Michelle said. The first one is a novel and stories that I've written called Beloved Comrades. And Beloved Comrades tells of 3 generations in the life of a small, highly unorthodox synagogue, revealing the alliances, grievances, and secrets that pulsate beneath the seemingly mundane facade of institutional life. And through a series of pointed, highly charged encounters, the interlocking fates of the congregants and the interior life of the synagogue are explored. So I wanted to look at the same events from multiple perspectives to really show how even seemingly minor events have long implications over time. The synagogue is located in an unnamed city. It was founded as a synagogue for working people with the expressed ethos that it is a welcoming synagogue for all. The ways in which it does and does not live up to these idealistic principles fuels the book. It was constructed in the shadow of an elite yeshiva, focusing on Talmudic education, and the working class congregation members sort of grapple with the yeshiva's presence and they construct themselves in relation to it. One of my goals was to create a multi-generational saga defined by intimacy, closeness, and intensity. So there's this constant interplay between the sweep of time and then sort of deep psychological and emotional excavation. I wanted to place the people who are often seen at the peripheries of organizational life into the limelight and at the center of the authorial gaze. I also wanted to queer the seemingly conventional space of a communal narrative centered around an Orthodox synagogue. The novel features a central character who's gay, multiple characters who are gay, and then lots of others who are sort of ambiguous identities, who sort of move in and out of queerness. And so I wanted the line between the homosocial and the homosexual to be decidedly blurry. In short, I wanted to use the synagogue as a means to investigate themes of faith, work, immigration, sexuality, community, art, social justice, and of course, as the title suggests, friendship and love. The second book is a book I've translated from the Yiddish, and it's called May God Avenge Their Blood, a Holocaust memoir triptych, and it's by Rachmiel Brix, who lived from 1912 to 1974. Rachmiel Brix was a Yiddish poet, prose writer. He was a pioneer of the use of dark humor in Holocaust literature, and is really an amazing writer who in his time was very well known. And I'm hoping that with this memoir, more readers will know about his life and his incredible story. So as the subtitle suggests, it presents 3 memoirs. In the first book, Those Who Didn't Survive, Die was ein nicht geblieben, Brix portrays interwar life in his shtetl of Skarżysko-Kamienna, Poland, with really great flair, lots of detail, rendering a haunting collective portrait of a destroyed Jewish community as refracted through his maternal great uncle, Reb Mendel Feldman. And so all the action sort of starts with Reb Mendel, moves out, and then kind of moves back in. And it's really sort of delicate and deft the way he does that. This is a literature of tremendous granularity. There's tenderness coupled with wide-eyed clarity. We learn about the pastries served at the Brit Milah ceremony, how the Havdalah ceremony was conducted, the clothes worn by Hasidim of the time. In the second book, Die Antläufers, The Fugitives, Bricks vividly charts the confusion and terror of the early days of World War II in the industrial city of Lodz and elsewhere. So Bricks was interned in the Lodz ghetto for 4 years, and he describes that in other works of his. In this book, it's all about the beginnings, pre-Lodz ghetto. In the final memoir, From Agony to Life, Vom Gesicht zum Leben, Bricks tells of his imprisonment in Auschwitz and other prison camps, internment camps, labor camps, all sorts of captivity situations. He probes the dark recesses of human agency, sparing no one, least of all himself, from his own unflinching eye. And it's really striking, his sort of refusal to kind of idealize himself. And yet he finds moments of connection and courage amidst the conditions of extremity. So taken together, the triptych takes the reader on a wide-ranging journey from Hasidic life before the Holocaust in a shtetl in Poland to the chaos of the early days of war in Lodz, and then to the horrors of Nazi captivity. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you everybody for joining us. I'm going to change the view. I don't know if you want to see everybody who's here. Unfortunately, Zev Baritan was having technical issues, and so he had to hop off. So he's not going to be able to share his book. I'm going to just share the link to his book, and to let you all know that this is being recorded and will be posted online to the AJL website. Anybody who registered for this talk will receive a link to the recording as well, and we'll put it out broadly once it's online. We have a number of questions, so I'm going to start up at the beginning. The first one is for Amy. Amy, I'm not sure if you saw that one, but I'm gonna just go for it. How did this publication affect the relationship with your brothers and sisters?
Not negatively. You know, I was very sensitive to their privacy within my writing. My sister gave me, you know, the go ahead and share, of course, everything. But, you know, I'm a very much put everything out there kind of person, and I openly shared my story, but that's not necessarily the personality of everyone in my family. So I was just very respectful of everybody, and I only shared what I felt was appropriate and in order to honor their privacy.
Eliana, a similar question. Has there been a response to your book from family members whose story you tell for the first time in your book?
That's a great question. I haven't yet heard, the book is fairly recent. It came out right at the end of 2020. I haven't heard from people who've seen their own family names in the book. I have heard from a lot of people. Every time I speak about this book or people hear about it elsewhere, I do get a lot of queries from people who want to know more about their family's experience, and can I figure out which camp their grandfather was in and which town in Central Asia their great uncle is buried in, and that sort of thing. And I wish that I could. And generally I can't, that level of specificity isn't available in the documents because a lot of the Soviet sources are still closed.
I'm going to jump to another question. I think this one's from Pam. Could you talk about the research process? I assume a book like this could not have been written before the collapse of the Soviet Union. Eliana.
Yes. So there was one book written about this whole experience, one academic approach to this. There were memoirs written, but in the 80s in Israel by someone it was his PhD project, but he was also a survivor of this experience. And he wrote about it using mostly Polish documents without access to Soviet ones. I thought I was going to be able to find so much more than he did. The truth is, the NKVD, the security services, nobody will give it's impossible to get access to their material still, not because anyone's trying to hide this story. This is good news. I mean, I tried to even say that in the archives. This makes you guys look great. You took in all these refugees, but they're afraid of what else is in there. So yes, I did find some other material, but not as much as I had hoped. And a lot of it is based on personal stories and is less about the archival documents than about memoirs and testimonies and people's life experience.
Thank you. Meera, what made you as an academic decide to write a memoir?
Yes, I get this question a lot. I love the question, partly because I love reading memoir and I loved contributing to types of writing genres that I love to read. And partly because I realized that it was going to be an excellent medium through which to deliver the issues with which I grapple with as a scholar. So for example, a recent academic article written in an academic journal was about these issues of location and where a scholar finds their intellectual and social identity. I'd written a bit about debates over Israel issues and search for social capital. And I found that a good way to deliver these ideas in ways that would engage the reader emotionally and really show them what's at stake is through a memoir. And so I really end up tracing a lot of my life in terms of personal anxieties and professional anxieties, how Israel has affected me. So it's just, it's a really immersive, tactile way to deliver a lot of the same issues that I would normally teach about or write about in other forums.
I personally appreciated your presentation, which was almost, I mean, I don't know if that, I'm sure it was intentionally like slam poetry. And that in itself was its own work. And so my question actually is the book prose? Or is it
the book? What I did for the presentation was I took 3 excerpts from the book and I modified them slightly for oral delivery, and that's where the slam poetry rhythm comes in. Because when you're reading in prose, the reader doesn't require the same kind of repetition of some of the nouns as they would orally. So I modified it slightly, but it will read, when you pick it up and read it as a really ordinary book, it will read like any memoir, any work of creative nonfiction with dialogue and scene, and it's immersive in that way. But you're right. Thank you for catching that I did modify it slightly for an oral experience.
Thank you.
And not that I'm an expert in slam poetry, so I appreciate that high compliment.
I've never heard a book talk like that, so I really appreciated that.
I figure I love Q&As about the book, and I've done a lot of book talks at book festivals and other forums where I'm in dialogue with others about the book. But aside from a Q&A, I find that if it's a unilateral talk, the best way to kill like a book like this that's fully in a creative nonfiction mode, and I don't think there were any others in creative nonfiction mode, so I'm not trying to critique anyone here. Were there any other memoirs? If so,
well,
I'm not going to say.
Resurrection Lily, but that was a little bit different.
Or
Yeah.
anyway.
Mel Brooks's memoir.
Okay, okay, I'm not gonna. Yeah, I just wanted to deliver it in a way that suited, because I'm a prof, right? I love talking and teaching, so I had to find the balance that isn't too teachy, because normally I'm very teachy. Let's just put it that way. Just look it back to me and my own foibles, not trying to. Okay, let's move on. Thank you for your questions.
All right, so I'll turn to a different question. Warren, how did you decide which musicals to add for the second edition?
It's always a sort of easy. When the first edition came out, I think it was 2014, like right before Hamilton came out, and after the book came out, everyone just kept asking me like, so what do you think of Hamilton? And I had lots of thoughts. So the first edition did very well. It actually sold out, and the press and I talked, and they said, well, we're happy to bring it out again, but like, how about updating it? And so a lot of actually had happened in those 6 years, not just in the musical theater, but also just in the world. I was working on this like now in like Trump era, politics, and really thinking about things around like racial justice and protest, and how something seemingly mundane like the musical actually is really saying important things about the world and race. So it was really interesting to sort of update that. There's also a new section on jukebox musicals, which are very prevalent right now, and things around casting, multiracial casting, which I've been thinking a lot about. So yeah, that's where the new edition came from.
Thanks. On that, my first viewing, I guess, of Wicked on Broadway was during a time that Taye Diggs was standing in for Fiyero. And so my Fiyero is Black. Like, that's how I expect he should be. And then I, of course, got the soundtrack and everything else. And I was like, well, why is Fiyero white? It doesn't make sense. And part of it was, you know, okay, we all come with biases and everything, but here he's somebody who's coming in this way. And it was so interesting to me then when I sort of became obsessed with Wicked and got a lot of the memorabilia around it, and that wasn't the case, and that I assumed that was intentional. Was really interesting just for me and my own understanding of, you know, myself and all sorts of other things. But I think that was something that really struck me. If I may also add, I saw, when I was a teenager, I was in England and I saw Les Mis, where Javert was played by a Black actor. And it was so seamless, and it seemed strange to me. And I realized that it was strange to me because I wouldn't expect that on an American stage, but it was fully acceptable on a British stage at that point, which also, again, was very telling. So I appreciate your talk. I don't have any other questions, but if anybody wants to unmute, we're a relatively small group, so feel free. Otherwise, we'll close off by thanking.
Warren,
Yeah.
actually, Michelle, I have one question. So for Warren, when you go see a musical now, does your mind automatically go towards the idea of race into the, do you have to kind of work hard to turn it off to enjoy the musical without any? I often wonder now, people who've got immersed, like when I look at a book now, regardless of, if I'm not cataloging, I just automatically picture where it should go on a shelf. Do you do the same thing now that you have done this research twice almost?
It's a great question. And the answer is sometimes it is hard to turn it off. It's also just hard to turn it off. So just about me professionally, I spent years working in theater professionally. I was a dramaturg, a literary manager. I was a theater critic here in New York, where I get hundreds of things. A producer, I've been a playwright myself. And so it's hard for me to just sit in the theater and just, I don't want to say just enjoy. Actually, a show is really good for me when I can turn that off. Often if there's a bunch of problems, I'll start taking it apart. But yeah, it's often I'll look at something and I'll say like, wow, why is the casting that way? Or why are there so many white people on stage again? Those sorts of things I do think a lot about. But that's not necessarily bad. It doesn't mean you can't still enjoy it, but I do think about it a lot.
All right, so with that, I'm going to thank you all. Thank you to the speakers for being exceptional with time. I didn't have to say anything to anyone. And also for really, really wonderful presentations. I am intrigued and looking forward to reading all of the books that were presented here today. It was such a broad variety. And so I certainly learned a tremendous amount. So thank you all. The video will be posted online on the AJL website, and hopefully we'll see you again soon.